At the age of 25, I embarked on the journey of finding my own place alive. After an extensive search, I stumbled upon a charming older house that perfectly fit my budget. The competition was fierce, as another individual had expressed interest in renting it. Fortunately, I had arrived earlier, securing the house for myself. Having always lived with my parents, I didn't possess an extensive collection of furniture to move into my new abode. Nevertheless, the process of relocating proved more laborious than I had anticipated. Throughout the day, I meticulously unpacked my belongings and arranged them in their respective rooms. As twilight descended, I resolved to assemble my bedroom closet, the final task for the evening. While engrossed in the process of assembling the cabinet, a sudden, loud bang reverberated from downstairs. My heart skipped a beat, and I leaped up, startled by this unexpected disruption. A troubling thought crossed my mind. I was alone in this house. With trepidation, I ventured downstairs to investigate the source of the disturbance. But aside from a toppled box, I found nothing amiss. I reasoned it must have fallen due to a gust of wind, and promptly righted it before returning upstairs to complete the last chore of the night. After what felt like an eternity, I successfully assembled the cabinet. Just as I was about to settle into my bed for some much-needed rest, the room plunged into darkness. An unsettling feeling washed over me as I fumbled to restore the light, only to discover that my attempts were futile. My cell phone, which I had been charging, lay dormant as well. It became apparent that a power outage had occurred. An unsettling unease settled over me, and I retrieved a flashlight from my phone, proceeding cautiously and quietly downstairs toward the power panel with the intent of restoring the electricity. As I descended the stairs and turned the corner, I was frozen in my tracks by an eerie sight. A man clad entirely in black stood in the doorway of the kitchen, his gaze locked onto mine. He uttered not a word nor made a move. I was rendered immobile, unable to speak, awaiting an unknown fate. With deliberate slowness, the mysterious figure quietly shut the kitchen door and vanished from my sight. I remained paralyzed, struggling to comprehend the surreal encounter. Eventually, I summoned the courage to push aside my fear and propel myself into action. I sprinted to the electrical panel, trembling hands flipping every switch that had been turned off, and the lights flickered back to life. Rushing back to the kitchen, I scoured the entire house, but the intruder had vanished without a trace. Panic set in, and I locked my bedroom door, dialing the police. Within minutes, the police arrived and conducted an exhaustive search of the entire house. However, they found no evidence of the intruder's presence. I was overwhelmed and unwilling to spend the night alone in the house, so I opted to return to my parents' home. For an extended period, the sense that the man was still observing me lingered like a shadow. Friends attempted to reassure me, attributing the incident to a prank or an attempt to frighten me. I installed security cameras and reinforced the locks on the doors, desperately trying to fortify my newfound sanctuary against unwanted intrusions. Yet, regardless of my precautions, the feeling of being watched persisted. Several weeks later, as I was on the brink of slumber, a noise jolted me awake, instantly triggering traumatic memories. It was not a product of my imagination. Someone was attempting to open my back door. The haunting recollection of previous events flooded back, leaving me terrified. Despite my efforts to move on, it appeared that the man had returned, his persistent attempts to gain entry stretching on for 5 agonizing minutes. Relief washed over me when the attempts finally ceased, knowing that my additional security measures had held him at bay this time. However, the fear continued to haunt me incessantly, both day and night. I couldn't escape the profound vulnerability I felt in my own home. continually questioning why this man fixated on me and what nefarious intentions he harbored. My thoughts inevitably turned to who might be behind these disturbing incidents, but I couldn't identify any enemies in my life. The only person who crossed my mind was the other individual who had expressed interest in the house. Perhaps this was his way of trying to intimidate me into leaving, or worse, to harm me. The notion took root in my mind, casting doubt on my decision to move into the house. Despite my fears, I resolved not to let this unknown person drive me away from a dream I had cherished for so long, having a home of my own. As time passed, a few months went by without any further unsettling occurrences. I began to think and hope that the man had finally given up. I also felt considerably safer, allowing me to finally call the house my home. My parents decided it was time for me to take a significant step toward independence when I turned 19 years old. They gave me a year to look for a place of my own, somewhere I could learn how to live alone and be completely self-sufficient. They saw it as a rite of passage that gave me the chance to learn about the obligations and liberties that came with adulthood. I initially embraced my newfound independence with open arms, relishing the thought of having my own area where I could establish my own rules and make my own decisions. I stumbled upon a small, reasonably priced apartment building after a thorough search for the ideal place to live. I noticed it right away because there were only 10 units total, one of which was still available for rent. From my first foray into independent living, it seemed like the perfect location. After completing the required paperwork, I eagerly anticipated the day when I could formally claim this property as my own. In anticipation of this new chapter in my life, I spent a month planning and making preparations. Finally, the time had come for me to move into my new apartment. When I crossed the threshold, I was met with a range of feelings. Excitement and trepidation swirled within me. I immediately felt at ease because it was a warm, welcoming area with a distinctive style. What mattered most was that it was mine, and that was most important. The move-in process was relatively quick, given that I didn't have a lot of furniture or personal items. I made the decision to sleep in the living room and use the bedroom as an office where I could work on side projects and design a space that was specifically tailored to my tastes. The first few days in my new home went without incident. In the building, I ran into some of my fellow tenants and we exchanged pleasantries in the hallways. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but as the days turned into weeks, I started to notice a strange presence, a man who lived next door to my apartment. Every time we crossed paths in the hallway, I felt uneasy because of this person's unsettling and eerie appearance. He seemed to be staring at me for a long time, and I couldn't help but feel that his attention was an unwanted intrusion into my privacy. I tried to brush it off as just paranoia, but it was a strange feeling that I couldn't get rid of. I made an effort to maintain some sense of normalcy despite these unsettling encounters, concentrating on getting used to my new life. I ignored my growing apprehension in the hopes that it was a figment of my overactive imagination, but strange things kept happening to my neighbor. I clearly heard his door's peephole open and close each time I stood outside my apartment door before going inside. He seemed to be watching me all the time, observing my movements around the building. Unsettling as it was, I felt uneasy whenever I was by myself in the hallways. I persisted in spite of these unsettling encounters, determined to adjust to my new life and ignore my growing unease. I clung to the notion that I was only going overboard because we had an eccentric neighbor. I was startled by a sudden knock at my door one evening as I was sitting in the living room watching television. I approached the peephole with caution and nervously peered through the tiny lens. To my surprise, there he was, standing in the dimly lit hallway, the man from across the hall. I greeted him courteously when I opened the door, but he did not return the favor. He then asked if I had any extra butter, explaining that he had run out, which was an odd request. Though it appeared to be a simple question at first, the circumstances were actually quite unsettling. In order to get the requested butter, I went to the kitchen. However, when I came back a short while later, he had disappeared. Suspicion and confusion started to surface. I knocked on his apartment door in the hopes of delivering the butter, but there was no answer, and the door remained firmly closed. I was disturbed by the strange event. I felt as though there was something wrong, but I couldn't quite identify it. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched constantly as the day went on, because my thoughts remained stuck on the strange encounter. A growing sense of paranoia set in, as it appeared as though I had an invisible set of eyes trained on me. Despite my best efforts to explain the situation, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I was startled out of sleep that night as I was lying in bed by a slight noise in the room. I turned to look, and when I did, the eerie man from across the hall was standing there, sending a wave of panic through me. His features were distorted, giving him a more ominous appearance in the dim street lamplight that was coming in. I was paralyzed with fear, trying to figure out how he got into my apartment. Before going to bed at night, I had always taken great care to lock the door. He realized I was awake before I could gather my thoughts or decide how to proceed. He quietly slipped out of my apartment with the same eerie grace with which he had entered. My sense of privacy was irrevocably destroyed, and I was left shaking and terrified on the couch. The brazen audacity with which this stranger had invaded my house, my haven, was beyond comprehension. I called the police right away, determined to make sure I was safe, and they came running when I called for help. After being captured, the man confessed, under questioning, that he had sneaked into my apartment and been hiding in a storage room while I got the requested butter. I struggled with the unsettling realization that I had been unaware of his presence in my own home throughout the entire evening, as the chilling revelation sent shivers down my spine. It was very obvious that I could not feel safe in the confines of my apartment. I made the difficult choice to leave, comforting myself in the knowledge that the man had been detained and was no longer a danger to me. I left that apartment feeling a complicated mix of relief and lingering fear. My mental state had been permanently altered by the experience, which served as a stark reminder of the need for personal safety, alertness, and the unpredictable nature of the world. Despite the fact that I was physically unharmed after going through this experience, the emotional scars and feeling of being violated would last a lifetime, a testament to the lasting effects of a confrontation that had severely tested my boundaries and rocked my sense of security. Moving to a new location can be very unsettling, which I didn't realize. In other words, as a 30-year-old man, all I'm trying to do is get by and create a life for myself. England appeared to be a new beginning and a clean slate. It was like a dream come true when I stumbled upon that historic mansion. I have always wanted to live in such a lavish setting and have my own personal castle. I then signed the papers and moved in because I had a sizable budget to support myself. I was worn out from carrying everything I owned into this magnificent old house. The best thing in the world appeared to be to take a quick nap. The day had been a marathon of heavy lifting and organizing, so I sank into my bed, closed my eyes, and drifted off to sleep. The dawn light flooded into my room as soon as I opened my eyes in the morning. I became aware that I hadn't eaten since breakfast when my stomach began to growl. I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled to the kitchen, but as I walked into that room, I had an odd feeling. On the back of your neck, a prickling sensation that screams you're being watched has become accustomed to you. I turned around to see a man standing there, which gave me shivers. He was directly staring into my home from the street, and I could see him through the window. I had to strain my eyes to understand what it was saying. I walked over to the window and squinted at the stranger, wondering if he was lost or thought my house belonged to someone else. He kept staring at me, though, and didn't move. To be polite, it's disturbing. I tried to shoo him out of the room like a nagging fly by closing the curtains. I held my breath and let my heart race for a moment before peeking again. As soon as he left, a wave of relief swept over me. I attributed it to a curious, if slightly strange, bystander. I shrugged off the odd encounter and ascended the rickety stairs to my bedroom. I crawled under the covers as fatigue began to pull at my limbs. I was engulfed in the depths of sleep, which came over me like a gentle embrace. Then the silence was broken by a loud ring. I felt sleepy and groggy when my eyes suddenly opened. The echo persisted and could be heard in all of the old rooms. I was having trouble identifying it as a phone because of my foggy mind. However, it wasn't just any phone. It was a landline, a relic of the past that I hardly knew how to operate. Half asleep, I stumbled downstairs cursing my misfortune. I grabbed the receiver in an effort to block out the noise. I put the phone to my ear, and all I heard was breathing. Then I said in a trembling voice, "Hello." Again, I got no answer, just someone breathing into the phone. My lumbar region and veins tingled with anxiety as I was on the phone, and my fingers began to shake. I slammed the receiver to the ground out of a mixture of rage and fear. This nonsense is beyond what I could stand. I grabbed the old phone and ran back to my room, vowing never to let it surprise me again. Even so, it did. It rang once more, its sharp sound stabbing my nerves. While getting ready for questions, I reached for it. Then, with a cold, calculated voice, he slithered through the crowd. "I'm waiting for you. Come downstairs." My veins were extremely chilly. I summoned the courage to tiptoe downstairs while clutching a glass bottle of water like it was a lifeline. Wondering who this was. Was he in my house making fun of me? Or was it some sick game or sick prank? As I got closer to the ground, the floorboards began to creak under my feet, and my heart began to beat against my ribs. Standing there, leaning his nose against the window, was the man with the menacing grin. I froze as fear overcame me. He was the same individual who earlier had been standing in the street watching my sanctuary. I ran back upstairs, picked up the phone, and immediately dialed 911. They rushed in as the sirens sounded, and their presence soothed my frayed nerves. However, the stranger had already left, leaving nothing but a terrible feeling of having been mistreated. He had visited and invaded my privacy because only footprints could be seen in the yard, which proved he had done so. However, the unease persisted like a persistent fog as time and life progressed. I lingered there, the memory of that strange encounter bothering me. But as the days turned into weeks, I startlingly realized the stranger had vanished with no sign of him. There won't be any more unsettling phone calls or ominous glances. I could never quite shake the feeling that someone was watching me, though. The creaks and shadows of that old mansion constantly reminded me of that horrible incident. My lavish mansion, which was once my ideal home, had changed into a terrifying place, with secrets hidden in every nook and cranny that I was unable to discover. As I moved through this enormous mansion, I constantly checked behind me, because the image of that man and his menacing smile haunts me. I am trapped in a state of uncertainty and paranoia in my lovely home, which has turned into a gilded cage.